It's all about the economy. The stock market is tanking, unemployment is rising, and businesses are hurting.
Nevada has the highest foreclosure rate in the country. Times are tough. What can be done to cope with the stress, the anger, and the fear?
How can you and your family better cope? We have someone who can help.
Stay with us. Lawyers, Guns, and Money begins now.
Now, Lawyers, Guns, and Money with criminal defense attorneys David Houston and Scott Freeman.
Good day and welcome to Lawyers, Guns, and Money. I'm Scott Freeman.
I'm David Houston. We don't have to tell you how bad the economy is tanking. Everyone is hurting.
So how do you cope with the stress and anxiety of those tough times?
We'd like to welcome back psychotherapist Tom Lavin to Lawyers, Guns, and Money. Tom, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to visit with us. And as we open the show, we talk about the economy, how bad it's affecting literally everyone. And certainly there are going to be issues of stress, and people are going to be angry about it and fearful of what their future may be. What can you do if you're one of those folks that may be suffering from some of those problems to try to deal with this, especially at this time when we have so much uncertainty?
Well, the first thing I would suggest, David, is that people acknowledge that it is a time of crisis in their life, and to know that crisis means danger and it also means opportunity, which brings us back to the point that people have choices about how they respond to this. We can respond to this challenge in a healthy way, or we can respond to this in really a way that self-sabotages us. One of the things I would ask people to do is do what Viktor Frankl talked about. Of course, Dr. Frankl was in Auschwitz for 3 years. He survived Auschwitz. He survived the death of his family. And what he talked about was the defiant power of the human spirit. And this is the human spirit that says, I can be beat up, but I won't be destroyed. So this sense of defiance, that I'm going to make something good out of this, that this challenge is not going to ruin me and my family, that somehow we are going to make something good out of this, is a very important attitude to take forward. The other thing that's important to know is that, and for everyone that's going through this, is to acknowledge this is painful. This does hurt. And then to avoid the trap of trying to avoid the pain or escape the pain, but to really feel those feelings and say this really does hurt, because the more we feel those feelings and acknowledge how painful it is to lose our job, lose our house, lose our health care, this will end up then creating less suffering, and we'll move through the pain and begin to create a new life, rather than get caught in the suffering where we have maladaptive coping mechanisms of turning to alcohol or drugs or gambling or prescription medication or domestic violence. It instead allows individuals and families to focus on, okay, this hurts, this is a challenge, what can we do now?
Right. Tom, that obviously begs the question, what are some of the coping tools you're speaking about? Because when somebody's, sitting at home and they just lost their job, say at IGT, after working there for many years, and they sit back and, at some point that severance package is going to expire.
Yes.
We're in an economy that doesn't have a lot of jobs for that type of skill, for example.
Yes.
What are some of the coping techniques you'd suggest when you're feeling that type of pain? Because people do a lot of very, very unusual things that they normally wouldn't do, but for the fact they have those feelings. So,
well, one of the things that we want to do, and of course, Gonzalez, who wrote that book called Deep Survival, where he talks about people out in the wilderness who make good survival decisions and people that make stupid decisions. And one of the first things is to not panic, to not just run out and do something stupid. In other words, to calm ourselves down and come up with a strategy for what can I do now to find a job or to save my house or to now find an apartment or to maintain health care or to make sure that my family's safe. So first of all, don't panic. The next thing is develop a plan. Then some of the more specific tools that are always important in terms of stress management are to maintain healthy behaviors, like exercising at least 30 minutes a day. A very important thing is to maintain positive contacts with other people, to maintain connections with other people. One of the things that we find with stress, depression, anxiety, as well as substance abuse is when people become isolated, then it starts to get worse. And so to have healthy relationships in the family, with your church, with your community, with your social support group, that's very important then, so that we don't feel isolated, but that we know that we're not alone and that we do have support.
And Tom, one of the things that I guess is subtle in reference to our discussion is, you know, it seems apparent when a crisis hits, we all start to remember the basic values and what's important. And so all of a sudden, maybe whether or not you're buying the new car, you're getting the new suit or new jewelry, you start to realize, if you're going to be successful, I assume, that you have to put things in perspective and realize that the core values, the family, as you said, and friends, and staying healthy, all of that has now become more important. But how do you get somebody to make that transition? The guy who's worried, for instance, that they're not going to be able to buy as much for their family, how do you get that guy to make the transition to realize, I don't need to buy as much for my family, because if I'm there and spending time with them, that's really a greater gift. What's your suggestion to make that transition?
Well, I think one of the things that happens, David, is that people go through a grieving process. It's kind of like almost like detox, you know, where if you're used to buying this and buying that, and like during this holiday season, if you're used to going skiing and giving out a bunch of presents, and now you're not able to do that. So you do kind of go through a detox or a period of grief and loss. And what happens then, though, is that you begin to take a look at what is important. And this can be a time where the family does pull together. Sometimes in times of prosperity, we don't spend that time to share and communicate with one another in a deeply intimate or affectionate way. We just buy somebody a present and say, well, they should know I love them because I bought them this car or this diamond. Now we're being challenged, as you were saying, to go back to those core values of communication and caring and really focusing on the things that really do matter. I mean, there is that cliche that it's the thought that counts when we give a gift. And so times like this bring us back to that basic truth of the cliche, that it's really the thoughtfulness, the caring about one another that really matters. It's not how great the gift is or how big the car is or anything like that.
Thomas, does that type of analysis or consideration change or become more intensive during the holiday season? You know, we're in the middle of it right now. I think we just had Christmas, and we're heading towards New Year's, and then people are kind of reflecting, and there's, you know, high rates of depression around this time. What are some additional coping skills that people can have?
That's a good point, that during this time it is highly intensified because we bring our family of origin issues with us. We bring these expectations with us. And so one of the things that's important, again, is just to focus on core values. What's important? How do we say that I love you, I care about you? Another thing I would suggest to our viewing audience is any of us who are blessed and maybe we're not going through a challenging time, this is maybe an especially important time to share with other people and to give, to help other people. And then even those people who are faced with this challenge, to remember that there are people who are less fortunate than they are, and to go ahead and help serve food at the diner, to go ahead and give some canned food, to express gratitude even in these times of crisis, that in fact there are other people who are less fortunate than we are. So this brings me to the last point, and that is to count our blessings. Whether we're very prosperous or we're going through a very challenging, painful time, most of us, if we will stop, in fact I would say all of us, if we will stop and list 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 blessings, things that we are grateful for, that can certainly buoy our spirits as well as the spirits of our family and our community.
You know, and that seems to be something that's very consistent with what you observe when you see folks. And Scott and I, of course, get a lot of folks coming into the office that are having differing problems, but the main part of that problem is most of them feel just detached. They're not part of anything, that no one cares. And I think a large part of that is just that willingness to admit that you failed because maybe you're not doing something that you think you should do. How do you, if you're that person, kickstart your life, for lack of a better term, to where you're not isolating yourself and to where you're starting to realize this loss, as you put it, the grieving process? How do you move through that? Is there any tool that you can get through it more quickly than not?
Yeah, one of the things that's really important is there is this sense of shame and this sense of failure. When we have that, of course, with shame, we want to cover up.
Right.
And we don't want people to know that we failed. And so the first thing that the healing process then is to go ahead and uncover that shame and talk to someone that you know cares about you and say, I feel very ashamed of myself. I feel like I'm a failure. I feel like I've let my family down. And to go ahead and share these things. And when we do that, when we face our shame, it begins to heal itself because we're saying, I don't need to cover up. What comes out on the other end is we realize that we're just human. The other thing that's important for all of us to remember is when we go through these painful times, sometimes we feel like we're the only one. And if we can, when we're connected with other people, we realize that every individual and every family, at least 5 or 10 times in the course of our family history, we go through devastating times with sick children, with finances, loss of jobs, divorce, separation, that there's pain in every family life and that we're not the only one that's being singled out by life. And then lastly, I'd like to point out that we always want to look for meaning. What is the meaning of this situation? Because when we find meaning, we have a sense of coherence and we don't believe, again, that we're being kind of picked on by life, but that in fact there is an opportunity here, that there is deeper meaning, we can grow in wisdom, and we can grow in compassion and make something good out of this very painful experience.
Well, that thought, we've got to go to break with psychotherapist Tom Lavin. He'll be right back with Lawyers, Guns, and Money. This is important stuff for over the holiday and dealing with some emotional issues you may be dealing with. So stay with us on Lawyers, Guns, and Money. We'll be right back.
Don't go away. Welcome back to Lawyers, Guns, and Money. I'm David Houston.
And I'm Scott Freeman. We're pleased to have as our guest Tom Lavin, who's a psychotherapist here in town. We invite Tom to our show around the holiday seasons about different issues related to coping and coping mechanisms during these tough times.
Tom, one of the issues I'm sure that a lot of people confront, of course, is the issue of relapse if you have a drug or an alcohol problem or domestic violence because of the frustration and the stress. What can you do if let's say you're on the cusp and you feel one more thing happens, I'm going over the edge? Are there community-based programs that you can actually get a hold of in advance of making some terrible life decision that you're certainly going to regret for a long time? What can you do if you're one of our viewers watching the show?
Yeah, this holiday season, especially because of all the different pressures, there is a greater chance, as there is every holiday season, of people relapsing or getting involved in domestic violence. There are some really great resources. There are Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous. Those can all be found in the phone book. You can also go online and look up AA Reno or AA Sparks or NA Reno Sparks. Most of the clubs, like the Alano Club or the Triangle Club, they'll have 24-hour meetings over the holidays. There's also the line where you can call and have someone respond to you and say, tell you where a meeting is, or even arrange to meet you at a meeting or have somebody help you out. So there are those 12-step meetings that are available.
Well, you know, isn't that, going back to what you said in the first segment, but isn't that going back to having support during the holidays? You know, it begs the question kind of like, why does Alcoholics Anonymous have meetings 24 hours a day during the holidays? Well, that goes back to our previous point of this is one of the most stressful times. And in addition, when you add the economy and people losing jobs, I mean, really, the point of it is that you're looking for support, and people that are similarly situated would give you that kind of support. Is that kind of one of the coping things you're speaking about?
Exactly. I mean, as John Donne said, no man is an island. But when we start to feel like we're an island, healthcare research shows that whether we're talking about heart disease, strokes, cancer, as well as substance abuse or domestic violence, being isolated is a top predictor for these health problems evolving. And so to stay connected on a mental, emotional, and social level with other people is extremely important. To know that we're not alone, to know that there are other people who understand us, to have someone to talk to, and also to be able to give to other people, to listen to other people's problems is very important. So this sense of connection is extremely important. And to go back to domestic violence, I would like to mention that if you go to domestic violence in Nevada, if you Google that, there will be resources that come up. And of course, locally here in Reno and Sparks, CAW is a very good resource. You can,
what is CAW?
Community to Aid Abused Women. That's a great resource for women and families where there's been domestic violence.
Now, what about if you're considering actually being the perpetrator? You're the individual who's reached that point of stress. I mean, is there assistance for you as well? Can you Google it or call and say, hey, listen, I'm really in bad shape right now. I feel like I'm going to lose it. Do they have a resource to where maybe that person, like somebody on drugs or rather recovering from drugs or alcohol, can go to NA or AA? Is there something for somebody who may be just toward the wits' end as far as dealing with distress and fears they might commit an act of domestic violence.
Yes, one of the things I would suggest they do is go to the Yellow Pages and look under psychologist or psychotherapist or marriage and family therapist. And there will be therapists there who have a practice in domestic violence, to give them a call. To call family counseling services could be very helpful.
Right.
I would suggest if someone really feels like they're on the verge of perpetrating violence, that they call 911 on themselves and get some help. Also the crisis call center. And I'm sorry, I don't have that number off the top of my head right now.
But it's under crisis
But
call
if
center?
they go under the white pages, or if they call information, ask for the crisis call center. That phone line is staffed 24 hours a day, and there will be someone there who will talk that person down or talk them through dealing with these feelings of rage, ragefulness, and vengefulness.
Sure. Now, does that also hold true for maybe people that are on a budget? And I know a lot of people say, well, I can't get help because I don't have any money and it's just going to make things worse. I mean, is there a community support system for folks who may not have the money to be able to afford this sort of domestic violence counseling?
Well, here in the Reno-Sparks area, and in fact in rural Nevada, there is the Adult Mental Health Services for the state of Nevada. And that number is 688-2001. And so if people call 688-2001, there will be someone there during business hours, Monday through Friday, who will respond. There's also an inpatient unit that will accept people at Building 25 there on Galletti Way in Sparks, that will accept people who are suicidal or homicidal and offer them inpatient treatment and help. On an outpatient basis, there are psychiatrists, psychologists, service coordinators, people that help people find jobs. There's a whole network to help people in crisis at Adult Mental Health Services over on Galletti Way.
Sounds like they're all busy this time of year.
Very busy.
It's not a lot of time off for psychotherapists during the holidays.
That's right.
Based upon the different crisis issues that come up and the different issues that come up, family, life type stuff that the holidays bring it out. I mean, you think about Thanksgiving and you're isolated, you don't have family, and everybody else has family around. It can be very depressing, I assume.
Yes, but if someone did call a psychotherapist and they were totally booked, a psychotherapist still, for someone in crisis, either would make room for someone in their practice, or they would refer to someone else that might have an opening. So whoever is watching, if they're concerned about themselves or a family member, please go ahead and call Adult Mental Health, call the Crisis Call Center.
How about call you?
You can feel free to call me.
What's your number?
My website, actually, Obi, I think, has my website. He can put that up on the screen. And if people go to my website, they'll see over 40 newsletters that help people deal with stress, crisis, conflict, substance abuse,
well, tell us what it is.
communication. My telephone number is listed on my website. So if they'll go to my website, all that information is there.
Okay. And Tom, one of the things, and I know we started out the show with talking about the idea that we're in a very difficult financial time as well. There are avenues or outlets to deal with those problems as well, aren't there?
Yes, Consumer Credit works with family counseling services over on East Plum Lane, and they're a nonprofit, so there's not a profit motive. They're there to help and serve individuals and families to help get their lives in order, to get creditors off their back, and to help people get their lives back on track. And in terms of finding new jobs, there is, of course, the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, there's Job Connect, and there are the online services that people can use. And I would ask people to be optimistic. Sometimes people will just say, you know what, there are 1,000 people out there that are looking for a job. I'll never get a job. I would encourage people, be optimistic and say, I'm the one that's going to get a job. And go ahead and follow through and bring that attitude into the job interview, because that's the kind of attitude that people want to see when they're hiring someone. It's so easy to be discouraged, which means to lose heart. And I want to encourage people to don't lose heart. Be optimistic and say, something good is going to come out of this for me and my family. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to go forward and make something good.
Those are good thoughts. We've got to go to a break. We'll be back with Tom Lavin in just a minute. We're going to talk about different tools to help you through the holidays, and we'll talk about some of the major stressors during the holidays as well. So stay with us right here on Lawyers, Guns, and Money. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Lawyers, Guns, and Money. I'm David Houston.
I'm Scott Freeman. We're pleased to have as our guest psychotherapist Tom Lavin at Lawyers, Guns, and Money. We're talking about issues of stress around the holiday season. And Tom, when we were in the last segment, we were talking about your website and your phone number. Yeah. Can you give that to our viewers for just this type of season?
Yeah, it's www.easeap.com.
easeap.com.
Yeah, 323-3330.
And you're right here in Reno.
Yeah, right here in Reno.
Very good.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the things, at least I've discovered through our conversation on this show, is we go full circle into that idea that the worst thing you can do is isolate yourself, and that, hey, look, you can be living in a household of people and still isolate yourself.
Yes.
But the idea of it is, by doing that, you lose the ability to gather this community support, whether it be through the therapeutic programs or financial assistance. Part of, I guess, the solution in getting over that hump, kick-starting things, is being able to reach out and
Yes.
grab a hold of something that will keep you afloat.
Yes, and it's really two ways of reaching out. One is that we talked about earlier with shame, and that is to confront our shame and reach out and say, I need help. You know, I'm in trouble right now, or my family's in trouble and I need help. The other thing that's important in terms of reaching out is reaching out and helping other people.
Right.
Even when we're having our most difficult time. Like there's an axiom, you know, within the 12-step programs that if someone's in recovery, an alcoholic or a drug addict, and they're feeling like drinking or using, what do they suggest? Well, you reach out and ask for help, but then you also go help the newcomer. Because by helping someone else, we help ourselves mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So it's two ways of reaching out. It's reciprocal and it's mutual.
You know, and that's very true. I had a friend that had a problem with their children in reference to being spoiled and throwing tantrums, and what he did was he signed them all up to go work at one of the dining rooms to where his kids could actually see what the true meaning of life was and taking care of themselves. And I think it was probably, he thinks, the brightest thing he's ever done. And I understand that concept, because if you can put your mind into something other than your problems, you have a much greater chance of solving not only somebody else's problems, but your own as well.
Yeah.
You know, Tom, we have only a couple minutes left, but statistically, I guess, what are some of the major stressors that you see around the holidays? And we've talked kind of a shotgun approach of a lot of different things, but what are some of the issues that our viewers should pay particular attention to?
One of the things that people want to pay attention to is grief and loss. It's very common during the holidays that a loved one who has died in the last 1 or 2 or 3 years, we're going to feel that grief very deeply. And so to respond to that grief in an appropriate way, to feel that grief and to be able to share that grief with other people and allow ourselves to feel that, that's very important. To not deny it, not minimize it. Don't try to pretend that it's not there, and certainly don't drink or use drugs on top of it to try to make it go away. So grief is one. Another stressor that we're seeing more and more in the last, I guess, generation is blended families, where there's this stress of where the kids are going to be with this parent or that parent. And so dealing with that in a way that's best for the children and best for everyone in the family, that's a very important stressor to deal with. Another one is, which we talked about earlier, is this emphasis in our culture on materialism and believing that we have to give our children these great, big, wonderful gifts or give them everything so that they know that we love them. And of course, they don't need that, but in our culture, we're inculcated to believe that our children need that, and that's not true.
Well, I tell you, we're running out of time, but we really appreciate being on Lawyers, Guns, and Money again, Tom, and especially this time of the holiday. So thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
And we want to thank you, of course, for joining us. And again, thank you, Tom, and you guys have a great Sunday. If you need some help, reach out for it, because it is there for you.